Is it realistic that we should commit to spending the kind of money that Donald Trump is asking? And what's the state of our armed forces right now?
The answer is that they're remarkably hollow. And indeed, the British Army has given up a huge number of its tanks and artillery pieces to Ukraine and doesn't any longer have enough for what is required. Now, this, to be fair to everybody, has been a process of neglect over a 30-year period. And, of course, what has happened in that time is that warfare has also evolved. And we have these holes that need filling, but it's also the case that we need to digitise and take account of the digital era that we're now in. But I think we also need to be clear about how vulnerable our country is. 95% of the UK's data comes through undersea cables. 45% of our gas comes from Norway in undersea pipelines. We get 40% of our food via sea. Much of our critical national infrastructure is not properly protected by cyber defences. We are in a position, I think, where we are massively vulnerable at the moment. And whether we like it or not, that means we're going to have to start protecting ourselves. And the sort of onslaught that Ukraine has suffered from the air via drones and missiles over the course of the last 3 years is unsustainable as far as the UK is concerned. We might be able to park a destroyer in the Thames to protect parts of London, but nothing more than that.
So when Nick talks and Keir Starmer's talked about a peacekeeping force or a reassurance force of some kind, should there be some kind of peace deal and the force would be there in order to to act as a buffer between Ukraine and Russia, is it realistic that we have the troops to send?
It depends on the nature of the task. I mean, if it is an observer mission and we're going to be driving around in white vehicles, that's fine. But if, as I suspect it will need to be, a force that can deter Putin's aggression, then fundamentally we are not equipped or manned to be able to do that at the moment. And that, I'm afraid, means that 2.5% of GDP needs to be spent now, not in the end of this Parliament. It has to be spent now. Now, we're talking about an extra £8 billion a year from public sector spending of £1.2 trillion. Difficult choices may have to be made. There are some smart ideas about, like a rearmament bank, for example, where perhaps governments in Europe can borrow money on favourable terms to make it easier to invest in defence. But we are going to have to spend more money if we seriously believe that Putin is a threat to us in the future.
And clearly, if we have to spend more money, we have to take the money from somewhere or potentially raise taxes. Let's see what our audience think about that. Yes, the man in the white shirt. Yes, you've got a microphone over you.
So, if we did decide to send peacekeepers and they were actually shot at, would that not be the start of World War III?
Yeah, I'll put that to our panel. Let me hear from the man in front as well.
Putin is a master of the frozen conflict. Europe is awash in frozen conflicts in Transnistria, in South Ossetia. There's been a frozen conflict in Korea for the last 70 years. Yes, those frozen conflicts require peacekeepers. Without US boots on the ground, will Putin be deterred?
And can I ask you, would you be happy, since the question was about defence spending, to see more of our money being spent on defence?
Absolutely.
OK. Let's hear from the man in the blue shirt there. What about you?
Yeah, so I think if you think about what's happened, you've had Ukraine having its land and its sovereignty taken away and not involved in talks. We're talking about Russia being encouraged to be able to do whatever it wants to do. How can you come up with a budget that's big enough to contain what will happen as a consequence of that?
I mean, Nick, if we... This Nick. If we got to...
you clarified.
Yeah, sure. So if we've got to something like defence spending increasing to 2.5%, that would be... We'd have to find the money either through tax rises or additional cuts of about 9 billion. 3%, it's 17 billion. That's the equivalent of the Justice Department and the Business and Trade Departments combined. Is there any hope in hell of that happening?
Look, there's no doubt that
should it happen?
there are hard choices, and Fiona, you're right to highlight them. This government came into office on a manifesto that set out that in our first year of office, we would set out a path to getting to spend 2.5% on defence. In terms of the immediate need that Nick is talking about, in the budget, the Chancellor announced an additional £2.8 billion to defence. We also delivered the largest pay rise for the armed forces in 20 years. So the first priority for this government, and indeed should be of any government, is security and keeping people safe.
But what I'm asking is there a realistic prospect, given the fact that we've been told ever since the government came in, there's no money? you know, that famous £22 billion black hole.
That's our inheritance.
Is there a realistic chance that defence spending is going to increase the kind of levels that Donald Trump is talking about? Or, as the man back there said, are needed to try and have the force that would be required?
Well, this government will do what is necessary to keep people safe. Firstly, we will set out that path to 2.5% of GDP being spent on defence this spring. There's then a wider question here about defence, not just the amount we're spending, but how we are spending it most effectively. Our strategic defence review, it's being led by Lord Robertson, who's respected across political parties, former Secretary-General of NATO, is looking at threats, looking at capability, looking at the state of our armed forces, but also looking at resources.
While you're saying this, why are you?
At resources, well,
I've never seen a defence review succeed if it's out of sync with the comprehensive spending review.
Let me
across all the departments.
Can I just to reassure Nick just for a moment there? On the comprehensive spending review is also coming in June.
Which is about all government spending across departments.
Absolutely, to Nick's point. So you do have, first of all, that strategic defence review, which will be looking at resources, both the amount we need to spend to keep people safe, but also how effectively it is spent as well, with also the comprehensive spending review in June. But this government will do what is required to keep people safe.
You've been itching to come down. You're sitting there, fidgeting in your chair.
Nick Thomas-Sims was right. He called it a once-in-a-generation, right, event. Donald Trump has come in, very clear messaging at NATO last week, which was the United States is no longer going to be the primary guarantor of European security, right? That is a very clear and stark message and a fundamental change since the founding of NATO. It's not going to be the cornerstone of our security in Europe, including the United Kingdom. We can take lots of issues with what Donald Trump has said about Ukraine and Russia and Putin. But we do have to listen to the very stark warning the United States government, going back to President Obama, has been giving, which is we all have to take a greater share of our responsibility in keeping ourselves safe and secure and defending our values.
But Neve's question is, should we commit to President Trump's demands on increased spending? And if so, where should the money come from?
Well,
I know you're not in government any longer,
so
but
first of all, it's important to finish this, because for decades, both governments of different colours have hollowed out defence and taken the defence budget and spent it on lots of other policies. Everything from roads, transport, foreign aid, whatever. And the answer is we do need to listen to the United States. We should have done it in 2014 when Obama. We spent years with tricks of pretending we're artificially inflating our defence budgets. The defence budget, the latest one, you just heard Nick talk about we've increased our defence budget by $3 billion. They haven't. They've rolled in the $3 billion they've sent to Ukraine and claimed it's the core defence budget. That is called Treasury tricks. 2014, my government put VAT receipts into the MOD budget to make sure that the £1.6 billion we pay back to the Treasury on VAT is in all our defence budgets. You can't kill anyone with a VAT receipt. So the answer is the threat.
OK, so the answer is spend more. You'll make that clear. Where should the money come from?
Well, to leaders to choose, right? No more tricks to find the money. It has to come from other government priorities. Now, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir, is the man in the hot seat. To lead is to choose. You can take it from international aid, you can take it from public sector pensions, you can take it from whatever you like. But the real message here is there's a cultural shift. There's a new era. Yeah, we have to get used to the culture that defence has to come much higher up the priority.
You can also get Elon Musk to come over and he'll find the money.
Or you also have the Russian frozen assets that are sitting there in
$3 billion,
I think it's a little more than that. And if you look overall across Europe,
300 billion,
it's 300 billion, exactly. It's 300 billion. So if you are asking where to get the money for defence and security of the European region as a whole, there you go. You have quite a big amount of money. Part of that money should, and this is a firm belief here, go to the defence spending on Ukraine and arming Ukraine. But at the moment, this is the biggest and possibly the only threat to European security, the war going on in Ukraine, which can and is likely to spread unless the aggressor and the dictator is stopped.
Let's talk about, we're talking about spending. You're looking incredibly anxious to say something about there at the back.
Sorry,
What's your view? Should we spend more, and where would you like to see the money come from?
There's two parts. Putin wants a complete destruction of Ukraine. There could be no peace or no justice. Where does the money come from? The money comes... Britain's done an amazing job in supporting Ukraine. Britain can't do it on its own.
Putin's done an amazing
job. So what we do is we create a European Bank of Reconstruction and Rearmament that's directed towards Ukraine, where a certain percentage of the GDP goes to that bank.
OK. Man here we have two people in the front. Let's hear from both of you. Yes, you first of all.
I have actually two answers. So for the money, to Right Honourable, the government just cancelled 2 gas licenses in the North Sea. So if we actually invest in energy, allow people to produce, pay money, that would bring a lot of income in our treasury. We're currently stifling I'm from energy business, so we're stifling our energy business unnecessarily. We want growth at one time, and we don't allow oil and gas exploration another time. Like you said, so that's for money today. And second, Britain has a very simple thing it can do to it. There's $2.5 billion of Abramovich money sitting in Barclays Bank for 2 years. It's not Trump, it's not EU, it's just Britain. Why can't we take this money and give it to Ukraine?
Why can't we?
Well, on that...
And the rest of the money that Liz is talking about.
On that, the G7, and very much supported by the United Kingdom making a contribution, has indeed been advancing loans to Ukraine, and they will be paid back by the profits
the question is
from
why
seized
you're
Russian
asking specifically
assets.
why don't we take Abramovich's money, unless you're saying there's this 300 billion which has been frozen of Russian assets.
Well, I'm just giving the answer on the frozen Russian assets.
No,
because
it's Abramovich 2.5 billion from sales of Chelsea in Barclays
the specific case. Can I just give the general answer on Russian assets? Is we are committed to looking at all lawful ways, so that whether it's profits from those assets or otherwise, to ensure that money goes back.
Is there
to
an
Ukraine.
issue at the moment that it isn't lawful? Is that what? Because at the moment the interest on that. Hang on, just let me say the interest on that money is being used, as I understand it, to support
the
Ukraine. But the actual money that is sitting there, the frozen asset, is not being used. Is that because there's a question about whether it's legal to use it or not?
It's about lawfulness, of course, but it's also about international agreement. And it's really important that, as we work together. But to reassure the point, the G7 has already agreed and is advancing loans to Ukraine, to which Britain is contributing, and they will be paid back, not by the Ukrainian government, but by the profits from those seized Russian assets.
You've made your point. I'm going to hear from the man next to you. Yes.
I think we were missing a very crucial point here. The question was whether Putin is a threat to UK. I've shared my life between Ukraine and UK for 25 years. I hold dual citizenship. I care about UK as much as I care about Ukraine. And Putin is a threat to UK because I see things happening with UK now. They walk with our informational... They're waging informational warfare on UK. They're breaking down your society or our society. Look at propaganda. Look at movies. Anora is a movie, 5 BAFTA nominations, 2 wins. They walk with our values, they penetrate, they intoxicate the society, they are preparing. So I think it's a matter of asking whether we start responding or whether we walk with their society to, whether we respond to this initial stage of their war with UK. They will come here because they've been trying to eliminate Ukrainian identity for centuries. It's a miracle we survived. But if you look how many ethnic minorities Russia digested, we will count 60 or possibly more. No cuisine, no history, no culture. They're gone. So that will happen to Ukraine if you don't stop it, and that may, the next step, they'll come here.
OK, that's your view. Yes.
I've heard it mentioned a couple times, but that there's this belief that Trump has this strong relationship with Putin, and so, it's just nothing to worry about. But at the end of the day, he believes he has this connection and this friendship with a man who is proved to be so dangerous. Just this week we've had, this anti-war musician fall out of a window, and, there's some suspicious stuff going on in Russia. And I think that Trump's telling everyone that, they're friends, that he believes that he can get Putin to back down and they can make all these agreements when, Putin would eat him for lunch. It's ridiculous that he's telling everyone this information.
OK, all right. So I'm going to move on to a different topic. We haven't got much time to deal with it, but